Okay, so last time we set up our plots for our tycoon and we successfully managed to give a specific plot to a player who joined the game. So now we need to give the player the ability to buy stuff, and that's usually done by buttons. So I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. So firstly, we're going to need a button, and we're keeping things quite simple in this series. So I'm just going to insert a part to be our template button. Okay, I'm going to make it red. And I'm going to make it slightly squared like this, okay? As long as you've got a part, it's fine. It's no real issue, whatever it looks like. So I'm just going to use this, okay? And I'm just going to call it button, okay? Now, some of you might have a button which is a model. It's going to vary, of course, but I'll show you how we can work with models or other sort of types of parts later on. But for now, I'm just going to use a simple button. So I'm going to go to the properties panel and I'm going to make sure that it is anchored, okay? And make sure that can collide is also true. It doesn't really matter, but it will just give you that nice satisfying effect when you walk on the button and you step on it. And once that's done, then that's pretty much it. The only thing we're going to have to do is give it a tag down here in the tags area. So click on the plus and just type button. Okay, so that is all good. Next thing we want to do is we want to put it in a special place. So I'm just going to put it over here, okay? And this is going to be the button that buys the very first thing in our tycoon. But what is it going to buy? Like, we need to tell the player what they're going to get if they step on this button. So we're going to click on the, and I remember you just couldn't see where it just dragged it to, my apologies. I've just dragged it to the corner of my base plate. But to make some text on the button to show what they're buying, we need to go into the Explorer panel, click on our button, click on the little plus sign. I'm going to choose a billboard GUI, okay? And then inside this billboard GUI, we want to insert a text label. Now, you might not see anything appear. That's okay. What we need to do is we need to go to the Adorni property of the billboard GUI, and we need to set it to the button, firstly. And then we need to change the size. So I'm going to change it to 1, 0, 1, 0. And now we can start to see it sort of appear. But this is slightly too small, so I'm going to just set it to 3, 0, 3, 0. And this is sort of getting somewhere. Again, I'll just zoom out so you can see. And I'm just going to zoom back in now to the properties panel because we're going to be working here for a little bit of time. So don't really worry if you can't see what's going on. So I'm going to now set the light influence to 0. And what this does is it makes it easier to see, right? It makes it brighter, essentially. So light influence down to 0. And then I'm going to go to my text label inside the billboard GUI. And I'm going to set the size property to 1, 0, 1, 0. And this is going to make it fill the entire of the billboard GUI. We can now set the background transparency to 1. And that is going to make the background go away. And then I'm going to scroll down in the properties window and I'm going to set text scaled to be checked. That will make the text bigger. We can't see the text just now, but we'll get onto that in a moment. And then, yeah, let's just give it some text. So we can just say starter item, for example. And you can see it's going into the button, so we can, again, fix that. I'm going to change the size of the billboard GUI. So I've selected the billboard GUI, and I'm going to set the size from 3030 to 3010, okay? And you can see it's just disappeared again slightly. That's okay. We're going to change the studs offset world space to 0, 3, 0. And this has moved the text upwards, all right? So now we can see what our button is going to give us. But again, I'm not a huge fan of this font or this color. So I'm going to set the text color 3 to white. I'm going to set the font face to Fredoka 1. And I'm going to insert into my text label a UI stroke. Okay, so I've inserted my UI stroke and I'm going to set the thickness. I mean, you can set it to whatever you want. Like there's no right or wrong here. You might see that it cuts off here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the text label, and I'm going to change the size. Rather from the first value being 1, I'm going to set it to 0.95, so it covers 95% of the scale rather than 100%. Then I'm going to set the position first value to 0.5, and then I'm going to set the anchor point to 0.5, 0. Okay, and that should sort that issue out. Again, I'm not a huge fan of this black background, so I'm just going to change this to a let's go with a red, right? Because we've got a red button. And then yeah, that's it really. We've now set up our button, and yeah, it's good to go. There's not much else to do here. So now we actually need to make it work. How are we going to do that? Well, firstly, we need an item that they can buy. So I'm just going to head straight to the toolbox, and I'm going to pull something out of free models just to test with. Let's go with this missing noob poster. Now, obviously, you've got to be careful when you're taking things from the toolbox. You never know what could be inside of them. This is just for testing though, so you could always just make a part of your own. So let's say this button will unlock this poster, okay? First thing you want to do is you want to position your poster or your item wherever you want it to be. So when the player presses the button, where do you want this to appear? It doesn't have to be necessarily near the button, but you know, you just got to think about placement. So let's say it's going to go on the wall. Like let's say we have a wall here and this is the ideal place. That's fine. But we now have an item. So we need to somehow connect this item to this button so that when we step on this button, the game knows, okay, you stepped on this specific button, therefore we're going to unlock this specific item. And a great way to do this is by having an identifier system, also known as an ID. So you give every single item in your game a specific ID, and then in every single button, you can then set an attribute, just like we did with the plots, to say, okay, you step on this button, we've logged the ID of the item for this button, so now that you've stepped on it, we're just going to load it. So the first thing to obviously do is set an attribute of this item, of this poster. So select it in the Explorer, then go to the properties, and under the attributes section, click on the plus. A pop-up will appear saying add attribute. We want it to be a number. It could be a string, but for this video series, we're going to make it a number. And I'm going to set it to 1, okay? So since this is the first item, it's going to have an ID of 1. If you add another item, this is really important, if you add another item to your game, it will be 2. And then the next one will be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's really important that you don't have 2 items with the same ID. They don't necessarily have to be going in order as well. Like they don't have to be going up by 1 every time. Like the next item I insert could be 100 as its ID, as long as it's unique. And I say unique because it can only have that one ID. Like there can only be one ID for every item. If you have 2 items that have the same ID, it completely defeats the point, because the idea is that you have a completely unique identifier, so you know exactly what you're going to unlock when you step on the button. So I've just realized I've done this wrong, by the way. I've named the attribute as 1, and you need to name it as ID. So click on the rename. I'm just going to delete it and do it again. So you click on the plus for the attribute, and then this comes up saying add attribute. You want to call it ID, right? The name should be ID, and then the type should be number. So I've got a capital I and a lowercase d. That's just how I'm going to format it, and the type should be number. Once you've done that, you then set the value of the attribute to 1, okay? And for the next item, it would be 2, 3, 100, 1,000, whatever. As long as every single item has a different ID. That's just what I'm trying to get across to you. So now that we've set the ID of the actual item, we now need to set a value in this, an attribute in the button to let it know which item we want to unlock. So I'm going to add another attribute in the button, make sure the button is selected, then go to the properties window and click on the plus. Add attribute. We're going to name this ID of item to unlock. Okay, I formatted it like this with a capital I for ID, O for of, I for item, T for to, and U for unlock. You get the idea. And this is also going to be a number. So because I want this button to unlock my poster, and the poster has an ID of 1, I want my ID of item to unlock attribute for the button to also be 1. And now we've told the game that when we step on this, we want to unlock this. Although we haven't actually done it yet because we need to just do this final part in code. So if I go back here and I go to my plot handler, in fact, let's have a look what we've got at the moment. So we've got our plot handler. I'm just thinking on my feet, and I'm going to create a separate script. I'm going to create another script in server script service. Let me just go, whoops, we go here. I'm going to click on plus icon, I'm going to click on a script, I'm going to go back. And what we want to do is we want to get all of the buttons. We're just going to do a brief outline of what we want to code. So we want to get all of the buttons in the game. And when you step on each button, we want to unlock the item. Now, at the moment, we only have one button. We need to make this button appear on a player's plot when they are given a plot, because obviously this button is only on one plot for now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to this is I'm just thinking here. So what we want to do is we want to put this button on a player's plot when they are given a plot, because at the moment we just set the attribute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this specific plot that we're working on at the moment, and I'm going to just call it a template plot for now, okay? And then I'm going to take our button and our model, and I'm just going to drag them inside the template plot. And then I'm going to create a folder. I'm going to create two folders. I'm going to create one folder inside this, and I'm going to call it buttons. And I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call it items. And I'm going to drag my model into items, and I'm going to drag my button into the buttons. And then I'm going to drag this outside of the plots folder because it's no longer a plot, it's a template plot. So I'm just going to move this over here. This is just going to be like our working area where we can design our tycoon, and then we can just put another plot in its place here. Okay, so this is now like our working area where we design the tycoon, we put all of the items in place, and then what we'll do is when a player joins the game and is given a plot, we will basically clone this and put it, where everything should be. Okay, but we'll get onto that later. In fact, we'll get onto it now. So we're going to go into our plot handler, and when we give the player their specific plot, we want to load the buttons, right? So what we'll do is we will go back to our plot handler, and we will say load buttons. So what we'll do is we want to firstly get the template plot. So local template plot equals game.workspace.template plot. And then once we have got the template plot, we're going to get the buttons out of the template plot. So local buttons, so template buttons equals template plot dot buttons clone. Okay, and template buttons dot parent equals plot. So we're cloning out the buttons from the template plot, and we're putting them into the new plot that we've just given to the player. Now, only problem is these buttons are going to be over here, right? Say the player is given this plot over there. Well, the buttons are going to be cloned, but they're still going to be in this location. So how do we move the buttons from here to over here if they're on this plot? Or what if they're on this plot, or this plot, or this plot? Well, what we need to do is we need to get the position of the button relative to this plot first. So if we were to say, okay, how far away is this button from the center of the plot? And it would probably be something like, okay, 20 studs in this direction and 30 studs in this direction. And then what we can do is we can then take that value, all those coordinates, and we can say, okay, well, we now want to have it on this plot. So we're going to take the center of this plot and we're going to put that specific button 20 studs away on this axis and 30 studs away on this axis. So it puts it in the same position, but just relative to a different plot. So to do this, we need to go to the plot handler, and we're going to say, just before the parenting, we're going to go for underscore comma button in template buttons get children do. What we want to do is we want to get the position of the button relative to the template plot. So this is just another way of saying how far away is the button from the center of the template plot, right? Because it could be like 20 studs by 30 studs. And to do this, we will say template plot dot cframe to object space, and yes, you need a lowercase t, although it doesn't really matter. You could do either like this. Button dot cframe. Now here's the thing: if your button is a model, so it could either be a part or a model. But if it's a part, like me, you say button dot cframe. If it's a model, you say button : get pivot with a pair of brackets. Okay, so you do this if it's a model. If it's just a part, you say button dot cframe. That's what I was alluding to earlier. So we've got the relative cframe. So relative cframe is the difference between the center of the template plot and where it currently is. So it could be 20 studs by 30 studs. It's just telling us how far away it is from the center. And once we know this, we can then say button dot cframe equals let me just think here, plot to world space relative cframe. Now again, if your button is a part, you say button dot cframe. If your button is a model, you say button : set you say pivot to, and then you put the cframe in brackets like this. So this is for model. If it's a part, you say button dot cframe equals plot to world space relative cframe. Now let's see if this works, because sometimes it can get confusing and it doesn't work. So let's just click on play and see what happens. Okay, to world space is not a valid member of part. That's because I forgot to say part.cframe. So plot.cframe : to world space. Okay, and click on play again. The plot has been given to AlvinBlox. So, and there's a button over here. So this is surely my plot. Yep, there it is. So the button is there. It's in the exact same place as it is on the other plot. And now we just need to make it so that when you step on the button, it makes the object appear. So we're not going to worry about checking if you have enough money just yet. But what we'll do is we'll say button dot touched : connect function hit. Hit is going to be the thing that touched the button. Firstly, we want to check to make sure it's a player. And I've put this event to detect when the button has been touched inside this for loop, because it's going to get done to every single button that's in the template. So we're going to say, firstly, we want to check if it's a player. So we can create a variable which will let us know if the player exists. We can say game.players : get player from character hit.parent. And then if it exists, then this player variable will be true. So we can say if player or if not player, then return end. And that will just kill the function. It won't go any further because we don't want to be dealing with anything that isn't a player. Then we want to actually make sure they own the plot. So if plot : get attribute owner is not equal, so you got that little curly line, brace, whatever it is, equals player.userid, again, return end, because we don't want to be dealing with this player if they don't own the plot. So this means not equal to. Don't get confused and don't write an equal sign. So by this point, we'll know that, yes, this is the owner of the plot. I'm just going to add a little to-do that we need to actually remove currency or check if they have enough, which we'll do in a future video. But assuming they do, we're just going to say we want to firstly get the ID of the item, which again is another attribute of the button. So item to unlock equals button get attribute ID of item to unlock, I believe is what we called it. Yep, ID of item to unlock. If for some reason this doesn't exist, maybe you forgot to add it, we can say if not item to unlock, then warn you forgot to add an ID of item to unlock attribute, because I bet you'll do that once. We'll do a return end just to make sure you don't forget that. And finally, what we can do is we can find this model in the items folder and we can do the same thing. We can position it relative to where it was on template plot. But we're actually going to do that. I'm just thinking, again, on my feet. Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to keep those in the template plot, I think, and then we'll just move them over when they're needed. So when you step on a button, so we can get the template items, which is this folder here, and we will just store that as variable. And then we can say if template items find first child item to unlock, then no, that's not going to work. Sorry. What we need to do is we need to loop through this folder until we find the item. So for underscore item in template items get children, we need to check to see if the item get attribute ID equals the item to unlock. I'm going to call this item to unlock ID so that we don't get confused. I'm going to update it here and here. So if it has the same ID, in fact, we can say if the ID is not equal to the item to unlock ID, then continue end, because obviously it's the wrong item. But if we get to this point in the code, we found the correct item. So we want to clone it out and reposition it for our plot. So I'm going to create a variable, call it item clone. It's going to be item :clone. Item clone dot parent equals plot dot, well, we'll sort that in a moment. I'm going to create a folder and call it items, folder, instance.new folder, items folder.name equals items folder.parent equals plot. And then I'm going to do the same thing for the buttons. I'm going to create a buttons folder just to keep everything organized. So just copying and pasting this. I'm going to call this one buttons instead of items. And then for our button, instead of saying, just a second, template buttons get children. I'm going to say button.parent down here is buttons folder. And then I'm going to say item clone.parent equals items folder. And now we just need to get the relative C frame again of the item. So relative item C frame equals template plot.cframe :2 object space item clone.cframe. Now here's the important part. We could have an item that's a model. So I'm going to change this to a variable and I'm going to call it item cframe. Then I'm going to create the variable item cframe. And I'm going to say if item clone is a model, then item cframe equals item get pivot :get pivot, because you can only get a C frame of a model like this. However, if the item is a base part, then item C-frame, it's important you say base part as well because it covers things like meshes, unions, etc. Item C-frame equals item clone dot C-frame. I just realized I said item here instead of item clone. There we go. Okay, so I know this is getting slightly confusing, but we'll go over the code at the end. We're nearly there. So now that we have got the item C-frame, whether it's a model or not, we've got the relative item C-frame. So we can then say item clone, and again, we're going to have to do another check here. If item clone is a model, then relative item clone pivot to, and we're going to say template plot dot C-frame to world space relative item C-frame, and then we need a closing bracket there. Else if item clone is a base part, then item clone dot C-frame equals this. Okay, that should be everything. So let's just test this and see if it works. I think it should work. And then we'll just go over the code very quickly at the end. So I'm just going to run over to my button. Okay, I'm going to step on the button and nothing seems to have happened. So let's do some debugging. So I'm going to go into the Explorer. Firstly, I want to know, is the painting actually there? So let's go to the plot. Let's go to my plot. So I'm noting we have 2 buttons folders for some reason. And there are loads of paintings being spawned, but they're over there. They should be over here. So that suggests that there is something wrong with the... Oh yes, this is my bad. So we are basically putting them back in the same place, back on the template plot. We should be putting them on the plot rather than the template plot. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to create a variable because we're reusing this. We're writing the same thing twice. So just to make it cleaner, I'm going to call this world C-frame of new plot. And I'm going to update this here and here. And it just looks a lot cleaner like that. And let's just go over the code once more then. So when the so we've firstly created an items folder and a buttons folder in the plot. For some reason there was another buttons folder in there. I just want to have a look and see why that was the case. I think it's because we copied out the buttons folder directly from the template plot here. Yeah, we did. So we don't actually need this brand new buttons folder instance.new because we're cloning out the buttons from the template plot. So what we're doing is for every single button, we are positioning it on the plot. We're getting the relative C-frame relative to the template plot. So basically saying how far away is the button from the center of the template plot. And then we are putting the button onto the new plot and we're just transforming it by that same relative amount. So that could be 20 studs on the x-axis and 20 studs on the z-axis. And so that is just putting it on our new plot. Then when the button is touched, we're firstly making sure this is an actual player and not something else like a brick that might have fallen from the sky and touched the part. We're making sure that this player is the owner of the plot because we don't want another player buying your own stuff. We are then getting the corresponding ID of the item which is associated with the button. Do you remember at the beginning of the video we set up the attributes on both the button and the item which had a corresponding ID? So we're getting the item's ID from the button here, and then we are finding that item in the template items which are still in the template plot, and once we found it we are cloning it we are then doing the same thing here as we did with the button, in that we're finding how far away it is from the center of the template plot, and then we are setting it in the new plot by that amount. And then finally, we are just moving the item to that world space position, depending on whether it's a model or a base part, because you have to move models differently to how you move base parts. And then finally, we are putting that item into the items folder, which we created for our plot. And we have one last thing to fix, which is a squiggly orange line underneath when we say button.parent equals buttons folder. That's because we removed the buttons folder variable, and I'm just going to change it to template buttons. Okay, so deep breath. That was a lot. Let's now go back in and see if it was fixed. All right, let's head over to the button and let's step on the button. And there you go. Our painting has been added into the game. So there we go. We've just managed to make our button work. I think there might be one more problem with it though, which is you can step on it multiple times and loads more paintings get added. So we'll just briefly fix that by going back to the plot handler. And then we can just say if button : get attribute purchased, then button well, in fact, what we could just do instead is, get ready for this, we can just say button : destroy, and that will remove the button so you can't step on it again. And then I'm going to go back over to our plot. Okay, I'm going to step on the button. There we go, we have our model, the button has been destroyed, and would you look at that, there is only one model in the game. So there you go. That was a longer video than usual. The next one should be on your screen if it's out by this time. I'll try to keep the other ones shorter, but if you're enjoying it so far, please do like, please subscribe, share it with a friend, of course, and I'll see you in the next one.